All right, thank you all for joining. Appreciate the time. Today, we're going to look at how do we delve into some of the challenges that arise during customer onboarding and how that can impact the overall customer journey. We've got three really strong experts on the customer success field on the line. Why don't you guys take 30 seconds, do a quick intro of yourselves, and then we'll kind of go from there. Chaz?
Chaz Ripoll, VP of Customer Success at PerfectQuote, been doing customer success since 2006. And currently at PerfectQuote, we offer software that allows insurance brokers in the United States. Every year at open enrollment, insurance brokers gather benefits and plans from different carriers. Our product pulls all those plans and rates into a platform that insurance brokers can easily quote for your open enrollment to make their process a lot more efficient overall. Glad to be here today. Thanks for including me.
Very cool. Josh?
Yeah, hi there, I'm Josh. I'm the Senior Director of Customer at Comply Advantage. Been there about 4 years. We're in the space of fighting financial crime, so AML technology, using AI, ML, all of those buzz terms. And it's been an interesting 4 years because something unique about our world is that we really sell to all different sizes of companies, from startups that use freemium all the way to major enterprises and banks. So of course the onboarding journey looks completely unique in all those situations. So I've been looking after implementation support and success over those 4 years. So yeah, going to be a very interesting discussion for sure.
Great, thanks Josh. Dan?
Yeah, so Dan, don't currently have a really cool title, but was in SaaS for 15 years. Started out actually in sales before transitioning to customer success. Went through the whole rodeo of onboarding to customer success management, leadership through those. And I'm now actually starting my own business to help charities do more of what they do in the UK.
So you're going to have to help people on board there too, Dan. So I think the topic is still relevant.
Oh, yes.
So there's a lot of different pain points that kind of have come up, and I'd love to hear what you guys think that some of these are. When I've talked to other people across the industry, it's things like time to value for customers that result in churn risk. Who's doing what and what's that ownership accountability? How do you communicate effectively? How do you actually make it happen? Because your customers continue to grow. But what are you running into from an industry standpoint? We'll spend a few minutes on the pain side, and then we can talk about kind of the brainstorming and discussions about how do we resolve these things. So any one of you want to start with, here's pain points that our customers have had or I've seen recently in the past?
I guess I'll start very quickly. Time to value is a really interesting metric, right? Because it's one that we do absolutely have to look at, focus on, and make sure we improve. But a lot of the time it can be self-serving. It's a metric we're looking at because we want to show we're doing a good job. But what does value actually mean for the customer? One thing I really took some time to get to grips with in the world of AML technology is sometimes customers just needed a contract for value. They're trying to get a financial license and they need the technology to have that. So all the pressure and onboarding, sometimes they didn't really care. So how do we kind of cohort that out? It's an interesting topic because if we don't really understand what we're trying to achieve for customers, I think we can sometimes flummox around and try and do a load of stuff that doesn't necessarily get to the right place.
And my perspective is the time to value thing. It is something that's often talked about at different companies, but it typically depends how well sales has documented and uncovered what their pain points are and how the customer is going to measure success after the fact, and how well they've handed that off to customer success. Because a lot of times we're not in the sales process and we are just over. So depending on the maturity of that process and the communication between those two teams, success could be just starting over day one. And then that unfolds, then you uncover a whole different slew of issues, lack of alignment between stakeholder and the end users that you're just restarting. So I think I would preach, just going to a tech company, is how is sales and CS communicating from one team to the other if CS is not involved in the sales process.
Chaz, you mentioned the people that are buying and the end users. I think that's another thing that we often forget to do in success in general is call out who the customer is. Because if you look through that whole journey, you could have somebody whose success is finished when they've signed the contract, and then you could have somebody whose success is going to come 3 months after you actually sign that contract as well. So when we talk about the customer and time to value, I prefer to think about who are we talking about? Which of the roles do we need to help be successful? What does value look like for them? Because ultimately we've got to remember that we are serving people. And I think sometimes the word customer can create this mysterious object that we need to onboard. Whereas the reality is, particularly in complex B2B SaaS, that's often not the case. It's a little bit more complex than one relationship.
Yeah,
I think it's
and
an
I think
interesting point. So sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, just to expand on Chaz's point, and it connects together with what the pain is, right? I feel like in my experience of being with a few different companies, there's a clear difference between that kind of Series A sales process, which is you get your hunters and you're just trying to sell anything to anyone. You don't have product market fit or ICP. So the pains aren't truly understood, right? You're trying to push your products and start to figure that out versus a more mature organization. At Comply Advantage, we had a few people join last year. Luke Rogers, who's a big 3Ys medic proponent of sales, and it was revolutionary for the success team. Obviously, we weren't changing anything we were doing, but suddenly the quality of information about the customer pains completely different, and that made a huge difference to the onboarding journey too.
So we just our fractional CRO actually has brought Medic into our processes.
Nice.
And so at past companies, we've done BManter. Medic is a sales methodology for those that aren't familiar with it. Look up MEDDIC. And it's just a great qualification that allows you to capture all the key information, who's involved, how you're going to measure it, what their process is to buy. And we've rolled that out, and it's helped quite a bit. And so for us, the challenge is how do you scale that so we sell user licenses. So it's almost like a little more transactional. It can be enterprise, but it's also transactional. So scaling that process to fit when you need to turn and burn a little bit too.
I also think it's worth adding, because I love that point. And Josh, you were talking about sort of Series A to more mature. I think as you get bigger, you get more products, you get more strategies, you get new types of customers. So even at that larger, more mature end, in my experience, you're never really done with a mature sales process. In fact, if you are, your company's probably dying because you're not innovating fast enough, or you're not bringing new things to market, you're not bringing new people in and growing the organization. So I think if you can have a very, very mature medic up sales process for older products. Then a newer one comes in a new market, then you're almost starting all over again, even if you have that framework. So I think you've got to bear that in mind when onboarding. You can't. I think it's difficult to have a reliable onboarding process if you're multi-product, because some things you're going to be just figuring out as you go, figuring out new use cases for your product in that early stage, whereas others, it's more about how can we really get this as efficient and as effective as possible.
So I think it's an interesting statement where the onboarding side of things varies based on your product line. And I think that there is a piece of that where you made the statement of it's almost difficult to have a standard. And I don't know that I fully agree, because I think that it's possible to have a foundation that is exactly the same across. It's the who, the what information you need, how do you get there, what is the end goal, what's the success criteria. However, the how you get there is a little different, right? So it's, for example, if you're going to take a vacation, you're going to have to go somewhere, you're going to have a hotel or a place to stay, I guess is a better way to put it. And you're going to have to travel there, and you're going to have food, right? Those are things that every vacation has to have, regardless of whether it's a cruise or an airline or a drive or whatever that is. And whether you're going to stay at a hotel or a camping ground or an RV, those are all different ways to go on a vacation. I think onboarding is very, very similar to that, where it is standardized in the sense of you have to have certain things. And I love the fact that y'all have pretty much all said the same thing, which is the time to value is truly an internal focus. When the way that we traditionally measure it, it's like, okay, when do we think the person has value? Well, it's week 3 when they've done these things. Check, we're now done, right? And how do we make that faster? But true time to value is when the customer is really leveraging the product and is now truly sticky in the way that they need to be, whatever that actually means. So I think it's an interesting approach to think about kind of holistically, because that standardized onboarding results in a standardized metric. And so you have to be able to adapt that accordingly.
Yeah, I think from our side, we've started spending more time looking at milestones. So breaking time to value down to milestones. And then maybe actually changing the definition of time to value, not time from signature to, our system set up and they're using X% of their contracts, but instead time to get to the milestone that they needed to be at when they signed us originally. And if that was just the contract being done, then great, not much work for the onboarding process. If it was full go live because they're switching from another vendor, great, that's the milestone that we care about. Does make it a little tricky to report up to the board, obviously, because then you've got so much variance depending on your cohorts, and that gets complicated in itself.
So Chaz, Dan, do either of you have a thought on how to solve Josh's reporting to the board in a standardized manner? I have an idea, but I would love to see what y'all think.
No, I'd love to hear your idea.
All right, Josh, have you thought about, instead of time to value or time to milestones, it's literally, we're starting to change that discussion with the board around percentage complete to your milestones. So your target is to hit 100% of milestones in the agreed upon time that the MEDDIC process or whatever sales process has been defined gets to, right? So if customer 1 is 1 week, customer 2 is 2 weeks, customer 3 is 3 weeks, how often are you hitting that? So if you just change that kind of narrative to your board and say, we have agreed to our milestones with our customer, instead of reporting a straight time frame, report a percentage amount of time that where you're hitting that milestone agreed upon, or even better, percentage of time that we're beating that milestone. And that allows you to tell a board level story without sacrificing the uniqueness of each milestone.
Yeah, I think there's the two sides. There's the operational performance of how we're delivering value for our customers. I think that everything that you just talked about is a great way of doing that. I think there is this, and it's not just time to value, right? It's all sorts of metrics across SaaS. There is this need from a board perspective to say, we want to look for these key factors. We have a bunch of SaaS companies. There are certain variables that we care to measure, and we need to look at those specifically. So we still have to report that overall number. Although one of the reasons that I don't mind it too much at the same time is because it does put pressure on us to focus within and to figure out, okay, how much of it is controllable, how much is not controllable. And then for the not controllable, is that really true? For example, the amount of times we'd be told, hey, this customer, they don't have the resource to integrate, whatever else. But the reality is the package that they've bought gives them unlimited implementation time for the whole duration of the contract. So what if we had a package which says, well, actually, you're going to get all that you need for the first 3 months, but then there are extra charges that come in. It's not really about making money, but it's about trying to make sure that we can reduce that time to value. So I do like looking at it from both factors, but yeah, it's an interesting challenge. It's one that we continue to look at and iterate on.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, your statement on packages. We've done the same both here and previous companies. It is around, let's get you implemented, and leaning into that onboarding. It's like there's no time frame. So it kind of goes back to, how do you help during the sales process, or at least right at kickoff, making sure that there's a clear expectation for you and a clear expectation for your client. What I find most of the time, that pain exists on the company's behalf, is when the customer doesn't have any buy-in on when and what and how. So they're like, yeah, we'll get to it at their convenience, which is great. It doesn't help you as an organization staff. It doesn't help you as an organization plan. It doesn't help you as an organization get to being able to recognize revenue, because a lot of businesses, the way to recognize revenue is when that first user starts to use it versus when the contract is signed. And so it kind of depends on how you're doing RevRec, but it really changes if we're not aligned with our customer to say, this is how we talk about your onboarding success. This is what you're going to do and what you need to do. And being as clear as you do that as possible. Do any of you or have you any of you seen that work really, really well? And what does it take to do that?
So I can have a crack at that one. So I think it's really interesting, right? Because this to me also ties back into the size and the maturity of your organization. At the smaller organizations that I've worked at, where you have a single person that's responsible for the revenue journey across, this is internally, they are thinking, there is a person thinking about that first interaction with a prospective customer all the way through, right? So, and that's the reality, right? It's really the revenue journey, and onboarding is just a piece of this revenue journey, which goes back to your gates and stages and percentage complete. Because really what you want to know is where is this customer along that journey? In smaller organizations where it's a little bit more organized, I think it's easier to be able to have a joint conversation between marketing, sales, and success around ICP and around your tolerance level on ICP based on your financial goals as well, right? The reality is there are going to be some times where you put through bad fit customers because you need to hit a revenue number. That just happens in organizations, particularly at difficult times of year. Depends, of course, a lot on if you have investors, who they are, what their pressures are, that's driving that as well. And so a lot of this is about getting the balance right. Not everybody who comes through is going to be your ideal customer. But I think you're able to have a conversation around not just who our ideal customer is from a revenue perspective or a product perspective, but from a cultural fit perspective. That's what one of the things that we did at a previous Series A was, we had a sort of an ABC grade for them. And an A was they were really highly motivated. They had a compelling event that was coming up that they needed to get this done by, or they had a big financial problem. So there was real need for them financially to move and get things going. And they had a series of stakeholders that we knew we needed, particularly with a complex solution. It wasn't just one person's bought in, it was a person at the top, middle, and bottom. Everyone was bought in, ready to go, set up. And that's when it works really well. On the flip side of that, I remember one of my favorite stories was, and I will mention no names, but years ago when I was onboarding, I walked into a very large Fortune 100 company to start their onboarding. And the person who signed the contract said, yeah, I don't really care about any of this. I just wanted the tick box on my resume to show that I've done something. Go figure it out. Great. Who do I speak to? Dan, go figure it out. Right. So that's the worst possible scenario you could have. Went back to sales and they said, yeah, we need that. But it was a good deal. It was a good name. So you get a real range. But yeah, so I think this is a long story, but coming back to my point, if you can get yourself organized and you can bring your teams together under the banner of this is really a revenue journey, and you can help your executives and your board to see that, then it's a little bit easier to align around, that ideal customer tolerance, and you can be involved in the conversation. That just makes it easier because then you can do whatever you need to do with the customer.
I love the idea of the ABC, the grading. You're basically grading, so it's the quality of lead, and then you can start to measure your churn. How do we do for A's, B's, and C's? You're like, oh, well, C's obviously churn at a higher rate, and it allows you to tell that story to your board. That's something that segmentation definitely allows. I mean, one of the challenge we deal with this challenge quite a bit, and InsurTech, it's an immature market, very immature buyer. And so not only that, it's like trying to get users to buy in the beginning of the year. Well, guess what? Think about it. In February, busy season is Q4 because open enrollment is 1/1. So they don't even want to use the product. And so we try to preach about user buy-in, stakeholder buy-in, a top-down message, and getting people to use it. We tell them to do their work in different times of the year. They're like, what? No, like that's not how we work in business. We start working in October for 1/1 open enrollment in the United States. And so it is an ongoing challenge, and a lot of change management goes into that. And so it's a very real thing.
It's funny, recently I was having a conversation with someone that's in the Medicare space, very similar to Chaz in yours, and they were looking for an onboarding leader to really run that space. And I had this conversation with them, and it was a very interesting comment that they made. It's like their seasonality. It's no different than retail. there's this massive spike in a particular point, and then you have this 6-month period where nobody does anything. And I was talking to their sales leader, and what he said was, because he was a new sales leader that had been hired on in the down period. And I asked him, what would you do differently? And he goes, I don't know yet, because I haven't seen the up period here yet. And so it was a very interesting thing to think about, because your onboarding journey is no different from that. If you're in that down period, it's like all planning for that rush, that high volume, that high expectation, because you can't delay things, because then they're going to miss their windows, and then that ruins your relationship as well.
Yeah, so what we've done in our business review now with customers, we're meeting with them, we try to coach them on what the calendar should look like. Here's what you should be doing different parts of the year. Like, so in Q1, Q2, it's like, hey, prepare your book of business. Our end user's reality is during busy season, they're working 16 hours a day. So if you don't get them learning the platform in slow season, you're never going to get them using the platform during busy season. So we try to educate them on, hey, here's how to rethink about running your book of business through the calendar year.
It sounds like a staffing nightmare, by the way. Just listening to you talking about the seasonality of onboarding, you're going to have like 6 months where your implementation managers or your onboarding managers are absolutely stacked, and then 6 months of, I guess, improving documentations and process ready for the next step, right?
Just like retail, Philippe said, it falls off a cliff, and retail kind of sales fall off the cliff. And or in B2B tech, they don't make decisions in the fall, and kind of how it works in our industry too. Like they're just busy doing benefits.
But I think this is where it's so critical if you're leading an onboarding team to have the conversation internally about utilization, right? Most of the organizations that I've worked at, they have a utilization rate for their team, and they say, hey, 80 to 85% of our staff time is going to be spent onboarding customers, the rest of it internal meetings, everything else. And it's great to have that benchmark through the year of this is where we expect to be, but particularly in seasonality, it's not realistic. There are some times of year where you're going to need to plan for and communicate to the rest of the business, hey, my team is going to be 95% utilized. We're not doing anything, right? I need to protect the time of my team. No, we're not going to turn up to big cross-functional things because frankly, we don't have the ability to do it unless you're able to help us somehow, right? If you can get better deals in through the door, or if we can borrow some of your team to help us with some of this, or if you can give us some tech time to clear up some of this debt that makes it faster for us to do our things, right? But you can give your senior leadership team the choice. It's like, hey, if you need us to participate in these things in this time of year, great, we need help. Or if you don't, great, you're not going to hear from us. We're going to be heads down. That's the time, right? So a lot of this is about if you're a leader of these teams, your ability to communicate those challenges with your peers as well, because they're not going to know, right? They have slightly different busy times and busy periods to you based on what's going on in the business and your financial year and targets and everything else. So I think that's where I've seen a lot of teams fail is when the communication between different commercial leaders breaks down. Everything else just collapses behind it.
I think that's extremely accurate. And it's kind of interesting. Earlier, Dan, you mentioned the revenue journey versus the onboarding journey. And I love the way that that's framed, because if you think about like onboarding from almost always is an actual irrelevant period. It is a good way to frame it and to put a timeline on there so that everybody has a common language. But the revenue journey is really the most important from a business, like a macro business perspective. You have your sale, then you've got your revenue that you need to generate because of that sale. And then in an ideal world, that customer's lifetime value and the growth of revenue is there. And I mean, it's the reason that SaaS businesses succeed is because their retention rates are so high and their upsell net retention rates are above 100%, and they can grow with their existing customer base. And the new logos are the ones that are bringing in additional revenue on top of that, which then you want to onboard and put into that net retention pipeline. And that's why onboarding is so important. But I think having a holistic revenue journey from an internal perspective and that overlaid to that customer journey and where does the customer struggle lets you tell a story around how to be successful. And I think it's an interesting perspective on things.
I'm actually curious, do any of you or have any of you worked in an environment where you're seeing a customer for the first time, so they've done their first bit of business with you? Uh, have you seen a revenue plan, future revenue plan come along with that first closed deal? Right, hey, we've closed them. This is what we're expecting to do next. Here's what's coming in 12 months. Here's what's coming 24 months down the line. Because I haven't, because the revenue plan across the journey feels really obvious. And you see goals and targets and broad wishy-washy numbers, but it's rare that I've seen a really buttoned up, full-on account revenue growth plan from day one.
I've seen it in certain circumstances, so rarely. And once again, I think as we've got more mature and started dealing with some more mature businesses, I think they want to see that as well, right? They know they're going to be doing certain things in 6 months and a year. They don't want surprises. They don't want to be nickel and dimed, right? And in AML technology, SaaS is still relatively new, so there's a lot of that kind of fear. So in those cases, we can really get ahead of our competitors by providing a good revenue plan. On the flip side, when we were still that kind of Series A, small, like things at really early stage, we were putting forward contracted revenue growth models whereby customers would have year 1, year 2, year 3 step ups as their volumes would grow. Now, of course, we know the reality in this room where most customers don't grow to the successes that they want, right? Which is sad when that happens. But we then had this situation where we were contracting ourselves to contraction because we'd be hitting the year 2 expecting that revenue growth, and then it wouldn't happen. So it's a double-edged sword. You've got to be very careful if you are going down that revenue plan model, whereby if it's in the contract, it's a legally binding agreement. Everyone should be pretty certain that's going to be happening. Otherwise, it's not really worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, because you're forecasting this growth, and if it doesn't show up, then you're missing the forecast, and people are budgeting based on that forecast. We have a customer that had a pretty tight revenue plan of growth. They came on board at a pretty decent size, and they budgeted for a specific growth year over year, and they're growing. They are growing, but a little slower than they had originally anticipated. But for the most part, we understand the criticality of that first 90 days of implementation and onboarding, because that does dictate the whole journey. And I oversee the entire customer revenue. But the onboarding is our critical piece to getting them live for ultimately that retention and growth. It's the whole get them. If you can't do the basics and get customers successful and up and running and live and engaged and adopting, then you're it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, I think the revenue journey planning is probably one of the more difficult, right? Because so I've had organizations where we've had it contractually, like this is year 2, this is year 3. The problem is if any one thing goes off in year 1 or year 2, then the following years are odd. And that includes macroeconomic scenarios. It means the business itself. It means your onboarding took 3 months longer, 3 months faster, whatever that is. And the challenge is, to Josh's point, is you've got this Chaz's point, the forecasting side of things is very difficult. And then you're off on your revenue plans. And to Josh's point, you're telling the board one thing, and then you're not hitting it because the customer's revenue isn't in there. So what we've done is we hedged it. And we were looking at, say, a 6-month onboarding plan where they would buy 10 licenses, and then we knew they were going to buy 50 more licenses at the time they were onboarded, because they didn't need them during the onboarding phase because we were doing configurations and setup and all those things. Instead of doing that 6 month, we would push that out to, say, at day 364, because it still falls in your year 1 ARR plans. But there is less likely then that you are going to push it out and you can instead pull it in. And so that's always a positive. There's very few cases where the board or your revenue plans are like, oh, we didn't want to pull that extra $500,000 into the first half of the plan. But it's much worse when it's, oh, we have to push out because our onboarding took 9 months or a year instead. And so there's a lot, and I'm talking really big custom projects. But the second thing that we also did, and it's the same problem, was a phase 2 beyond that and plan on that. So we stopped writing contracts around that. And now it's like we are planning on closing a new opportunity. And so now it goes into your opportunity forecasting versus your revenue forecasting, which, yes, still has risks, but isn't nearly as negative at the board level.
And I think that for me is when I was talking about revenue plan, very much an internal tool rather than a reporting up to the board tool. And part of the challenge is, right, I see this a lot in success and sales and marketing, particularly when those three teams are separate and have very different goals. If there's not alignment around what you're expecting the customer to do, then you're not going to be able to pull in the help when you need it. And so we end up saying, well, we sort of want the customer to onboard, and we want them to have time to value, and we want them to have good scores on this, and we want them to have this metric and that metric. Cool, who cares? Like, in pursuit of what? And so on one hand, we say, well, it's in pursuit of more revenue. But on the other hand, teams will say, well, we're not really sure what revenue we're pursuing. So you don't know what revenue you're pursuing. You don't know when that revenue is going to come in, but all these metrics are important. It doesn't add up. So there has to be a vehicle where somebody is accountable for the plan for revenue growth for that customer. Now, it doesn't mean that plan has to happen, but I always love to have a plan to know how far you are away from it. And honestly, if we have revenue plans for 100% of our customers and we're only right 5% of the time, then the question is, cool, great, we've learned something. Like, why? What are we getting so wrong? Maybe we don't understand the pulse or the rhythm. Maybe our relationships with our customers aren't as good as we thought they were. Maybe we thought we had found the best product ever, right? Instead of this mad, oh, let's just shoot for X% retention. Oh no, we didn't get there. Why not? You know what I mean? There's a disconnect somewhere between, yes, forecasting is really hard, and the further out you are, the more wrong you're going to be, because people in the company will change, and the company will change, and everything's all changed. But you need to know where you're going. Otherwise, what's the point if you forecasts at all? So, but again, internal tool, right? It's for me, the revenue plan is to bring, particularly in disparate teams, is to bring that team together so that collectively you can say, this isn't going where it needs to drive these results. Who can we bring in to help move that forwards? Otherwise, you're just all arguing with each other all the time.
And I feel like that conversation starts to go down the path of another hot topic in the world of customer success, which is sales, upsells, account management, right? Who should own the renewal? Who should own upsells? And yeah, I've worked in multiple different versions of this where you have success owning it all and sales doing the deal and then handing it over the fence and not caring. And that's when you seem to get more of these problems down that you're talking about there. And then the complete reverse, right? Where actually account management and even customer success might sit under a CRO. And in that case, it's a lot more joined up. And now everybody does care about NRR and onboarding risk. And then suddenly there's a big difference. Maybe that comes down to the maturity aspects as well. But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I think I've got a group of people having that conversation a little bit in January too. So on the onboarding side of things, there's two other topics I wanted to kind of ask your thoughts on. One, Chaz, you mentioned the way that you think about user licenses and growing your customer base on the user licenses, and that onboarding is so critical to the usage of that. One of the kind of hot topics in the market is consumption modeling, or outcome modeling. So thinking about it as we're using the system, I don't care how many licenses I'm using, it's how many transactions am I pushing through? How many things am I doing? How much outcome am I getting? Is that something that either Chaz, your organization, is thinking about in 2025 and beyond, or either of the others? What have you heard as well?
Yeah, I mean, so if I'm following your question, so we do use data to understand customers' usage patterns to start to kind of level up what value they're getting the platform and to start measuring that.
Yeah, I'm actually talking charging for that instead of charging $100 per user per month or whatever. Charge for every 3 insurance plans that someone signs, for example.
So we have considered that. So some of the customers, some of our competitors do charge based on the amount of insurance groups you're quoting. But we're also looking at monetizing other ways. I think I'd like to hear what other guys are saying, if you've seen anything different.
Because it definitely impacts the onboarding journey, which is why I was curious. Josh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we've gone through this process. So we used to have a little more emphasis on user licensing prices, but we don't do any of that anymore. It is purely consumption based, purely on the number of transactions, the number of searches, the number of customers that a customer has. And I think, like, if we just kind of take back a step, what SaaS is, you, regardless of industry, you're usually providing a tool, and then the customer's got some users that go in there and do something, or do it through the API and get something out the back of it. We haven't really talked too much about AI yet, and I know it is a hot topic, and one that
That's the
every
second
company
topic.
is. Well, I mean, it links directly, because the reason this kind of links together is if you are purely focused on user licensing, at least in our world, where it's to do with compliance and looking at how many times a name has been hit against sanction lists, and is this person somebody you can do business with? There's no reason why long-term AI isn't going to do all of that in a completely automated fashion. We're nowhere near there. The regulators wouldn't allow it right now. But we're definitely getting there. There's some tools out there that already do it. So the value that we provide in terms of the sanction list data and the adverse media data, well, that value is still the same, regardless of whether the customer's got 1 user or 1,000 users. The value that we're providing is comparing that name against a list and providing ultimately a result. And maybe even we could provide the AI that does the automatic remediation in the future. So yeah, and then absolutely, Philippe, it changes the onboarding process, because in terms of who you're training, how much time it's taking to get a customer live, all of that changes as well, of course. But yeah, it's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective on the consumption modeling, it seems like you're billing in the arrears, though, right? You're billing how much they use. I almost feel like it lacks transparency for the customers, because they don't know how much they're going to spend with you, or does it lack the predictability? Like, I feel like it's a hidden cost. It's a way, you can come in cheap, but you make your cost up in the back end, versus us, it's up front. You buy the user, you can use it as much as you
Right.
want. There's no hidden costs. So I think
It's great.
that's
It's a great point, and that is the tricky thing to get right. You're absolutely
yeah.
right. Actually, some of our competitors, they do only do the price per screen thing, which is not predictable, and it can end up costing a huge amount very quickly. If they have a spike in traffic one weekend, suddenly boom, that's a huge bill. I think we've taken a model of, and it's better for ARR, right? But we've taken a model of having rate cards in place, whereby a company knows how many customers they've already got, and legally they have to monitor those customers against sanction lists and adverse media lists. So that's not too variable. You can put in a rate card and say, okay, well, up to 1 million searches per year, you'll be paying X per search, or something like that, and there's a minimum overall fee. So you can mix the two together, but it is tricky. It's not easy. It takes a lot of trial and error, and we've definitely not got it right all the time, but yeah.
Yeah.
Philippe, I wanted to just briefly come back to your note on outcome pricing. And I hate the term outcome pricing, but I like the term value pricing, because I think different models are going to be good for different customers, right? When I think about developers working with APIs, that consumption model makes complete sense. Totally standardized, and you can say, hey, great, if we do this number of calls more, we know what our price is going to be. It's very predictable. We're not going to pay for stuff that we don't need. And so for the right customer, there's a different pricing model that works. One of the biggest challenges I think that there is with I guess the further around outcome pricing is the same problem as marketing attribution, right? There are some change that you can see, great, if you do this and this happens and this is the outcome and there's nothing else that could have impacted that flow, awesome, do outcome pricing, because if you can do that and that flow is simple, then you're going to kill the market, because you're able to go to people and say, hey, your success is our success. I think in the vast majority of cases, particularly for complex businesses that have brands all around the world, that have really just innumerable number of things that are influencing one consumer decision, really hard to justify that your thing was the one thing that made that big change. So I think that's why sometimes we come back to consumption or actions. Hey, we've enabled you to perform X number of actions Y% faster, therefore your future costs are going to be X% less. There's an outcome there, but it's a financial outcome rather than an execution outcome. So for me, it's value-based outcomes makes you makes you question what value is for your customers and why and the environment that they're in, and decide your pricing from there. Don't just go on LinkedIn says I should price this way because Super Unicorn X just did that. It's you're not thinking about your customer if you're doing that.
I met with a sales guy for a different company one time, and I talked to him about CS and sales alignment. We're talking about under the CRO, everybody has the same revenue goals. And this sales guy, it was really interesting. He said that their sales and retention took off when they both all got aligned. So all sales's commissions got tied to outcome delivery. And like, so basically sales they get half their commission to close a deal, and they get the other half once the customer achieves their outcomes that they designed. And like, think about it. That's like a dream come true for customer success.
It's a dream come true for us, but I mean, a question I'd pose back to him though. I'm guessing the new ARR growth was actually more limited in that model. It's healthier ARR, which is good. It's better for NRR, but there's also this. It goes back to what stage is your company at? What is the goal right now?
Yeah.
Is it EBITDA? Is it ARR growth? Is it NRR growth? You can't have it all, and sometimes I think that gets forgotten about as these discussions are happening. But yeah, it's interesting.
And oh my goodness,
Josh,
if you want to speed up your, I was just going to say, if you want to speed up your onboarding, get that stuff, get it out in the sales process, right? Because so much of onboarding, when it gets big and gets complex, is you're spending an inordinate amount of time at the start of a contract trying to figure out, so hey, what is it that you're actually trying to do? And who is everybody? And okay, well, can we get everybody into a room and decide on what this goal and this goal is? So you're 4, 6, 8 weeks in, you haven't even started talking about the product because you don't even have the stakeholders because you haven't talked about value and outcomes. So that's, from what I've seen, they're often the biggest delays to onboarding. It's got nothing to do with product, nothing to do with execution. It's all about collective pulling towards a goal. And if that's something that you can and should do in the sales process wherever possible.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting on that statement is, so I agree that alignment is super critical. The better you can align compensation between sales and CS and beyond, the more likely people are going to march in the same direction, right? But Dan, to your point on, and I get pushback on this from my sales team, the more that you put in the pre-sales side of things to make the onboarding easier, the longer the sales cycle is, and therefore that also has its impact. So it's that balance between all of these pieces that are critically important, because you can get some of it during the sales cycle, but in complex longer term sales, it definitely adds cycles because the customer doesn't know the answer half the time.
No, it's excuses. I say that having been on the sales side. Yes, there is a point, right? Like, yes, we would love the customer to know everything that the product does before they walk in the door. If you demo every single feature, you're never ever going to close the sale. So there's an element of truth in it. But I mean, Chaz mentioned right at the start Medic. There's some parts of Medic that will help you pull out the critical parts, right? What should happen if you can't start an onboarding process, understanding, hey, here's why the customer bought this thing. Here are some of the major goals that they're pushing towards. Here are the 3 people that this goal is really critical for and what they're trying to do and what happens if they don't get there. That's the sort of stuff that I'm talking about, right? The big moving pieces. And quite often you don't get that because it's end of year and the pressure is on to hit targets. And then the excuse is, oh, well, if we did all this discovery. But I put although I say it's a sales excuse, the problem I feel is on the customer success side where the communication to the sales side is poor, right? If you say, hey, we need you to get 5,000 things during the sales process, of course you're going to be met with that answer. If it's hey, sales leadership, unless we do this, we're not going to be able to onboard in this time and we're not going to be able to renew. This is critical to business success. It's 5 minutes of questions. Obviously, unless we're talking about multi-million-dollar enterprise deals, that's a little bit more complex. But if you're talking multi-million enterprise deals, I would hope that the customer is doing some kind of checking in with you. And if they're not,
pre-onboarding.
Yeah, and if they're not, honestly, that we would grade that as a C. We've had enterprise grade customers who haven't had a goal, and they're just sort of it's politics internally, right? That they're wrangling and there's not really a great reason for them to buy, but they still spend a lot of money because it's the end of the year and they have to because somebody's going to lose their budget if they don't. And they walk through and you're like, this is going to go absolutely nowhere. And you can give me the revenue plan. I can tell you a year later, we'll still be where we are today. So it's a red flag. So yeah, I'm passionate about that because again, it's the devil's in the detail. There's always time to get good quality information. You probably don't need to spend the time getting all the in the weeds stuff, which isn't going to slow down the onboarding process. So that's the critical thing. What will slow down onboarding? It's usually 5 or 6 questions that haven't been asked. Anyway, that's my onboarding rant over.
Yeah, we have this direct challenge. I think the 5 to 6 questions, to be fair to our sales team, can be so vastly different depending on the specifics of the product, their industry. If you have the best qualified solutions consultant, sales engineers, whatever they're called in your organization, that process will be a whole lot easier. But that's difficult to get to. I think you're absolutely right. It has to come through sales leadership. There is a direct correlation for us between onboarding risk and sales cycle length, to your point, Philippe. The smaller the sales cycle, the more risk we have in the onboarding stage. Nearly 100% of the time, there's always the odd edge case, of course. And I'm in a great position now with our sales leadership team where there's a lot of this direct alignment. The compensation's been looked at in terms of, you know, crediting sales commission based on onboarding success, and I think that makes a huge difference. But it doesn't completely solve it because there's ARR targets. To your point, gets to the end of the year, company comes to you, they're I don't know, a dodgy company doing something weird, just need to sign the deal as quickly as possible. Is the salesperson wrong to turn around and say, no, we're not going to do that deal? Or should they take the 300K contract? And it's a philosophical argument, and I'm sure we'll think one way and that salesperson might think another, but yeah, you're never going to solve that issue. We've just got to control the controllables. As how do we then report on that? To Chaz's point and yours, Dan, around lead scoring, I'm a massive fan of lead scoring. I found it very difficult at times to necessarily get sales to align with that. And so then there's a question of, can we do our own lead scoring in the customer success world, right? Yes, there's segmentation in customer success, but actually, could we, when we've got a closed opportunity, score that account, score that sale based on the information that we have, direct that towards NRR, and then go back to sales leadership a year later and say, well, look, you know, these are the types of deals that have been incredibly successful. These haven't. What do we want next year?
Yeah, picking your battles, basically. You need to figure out what the things, picking the right battles, and they're gonna have the biggest impact that you think you can actually make a change to. Yeah, I mean.
So that actually goes into not the battles part, but the lead scoring side of things. It goes into the last topic that I wanted to kind of cover today, AI in onboarding, right? So AI, it's been around for a long time, realistically, if you go back and actually do the research on it. But the last year is where it's become this rocket ship. And I'm strongly of the belief that next year, anybody that doesn't look at AI in how their organization runs is immediately going to be behind. There's still a lot to be figured out. There's still a lot of capabilities needed, but there are so many different things. So how do you think, in a short amount of time, because we don't have that much left, how do we think onboarding is going to change with AI?
Very, very briefly from my perspective, and this goes across all parts of an organization, I think there is a massive responsibility on our own SaaS vendors and tools to utilize AI to give us the value that AI can bring. I think the more that we try and solve the problem using AI in-house, we're going to be reinventing the wheel, doing things inefficiently. I mean, this is why SaaS was created in the first place, right? So when we use, I don't know, Zendesk for support or Jira for implementation project management, those are tools that are in such a great place to use AI in an extremely well thought out way to provide value to us. I don't think they're doing it today. I mean, I know Zendesk has got some great, cool little AI features here and there. It's not really touching the walls of what it could be capable of doing. So for me, the project management side, using AI to reduce administration, to do automatic scoring, automatic lead scoring, all of the things we talked about, it's all possible. It's not easy. And if every company was trying to do it themselves, they'd need a lot of resource to make it happen. So we need our vendors to help us out here and get this stuff done.
Yeah, we're evaluating AI. I mean, that's the most basic use case, just to review existing content and serve content up through support cases. We live in a world where we deal with personal identifiable information, And so we need to be very careful about how we use AI around that. So our security team is actively involved in vetting out AI for specific use cases. But for right now, we're looking at specific to the support use case and utilizing existing content and serving that up.
And I think I agree with Josh on vendors being able to help teams. What I would love is for onboarding teams to be able to spend more time on change management, and moving senior stakeholders in the account to where they need to be to bring them and to build up some of those relationships early on to move them forward and to support if you have a separate onboarding and CS and account management team to do a lot of that. The reason that a lot of the time they can't is that they're pulled into the weeds. They're pulled into some of what I think of as the product onboarding, the user onboarding. And I think there's a phenomenal opportunity with AI to deliver custom onboarding journeys to every single user. Right? All of us learn differently. I need to get a little bit of information, then I need to go and try a bunch of stuff out, then I need to go read to figure out what I got wrong, and then it's helpful for me to have a call with somebody just to go back and forth. That process could all be handled with AI, and particularly if you're somebody that's got thousands, if not millions of users, you've got so many data points to be able to understand what actually works. That's going to be really hard for a human to go through. Then use generative AI to be able to build that process. We're not there yet, I don't think. You can do that once. You can use AI to build an onboarding process. But I think the future, for me, the future of AI has to cross over into personalized onboarding. The person who's really not technology savvy in a let's say a call center team who's trying to get on with your product but needs more than just a video or whatever else. Who have they got in in the corner of their product that's coaching them, right? Like we've talked about product coaches before that we have in organizations. Why is that not already an AI service? Learning what the user needs, right? So it's for me, it's always humans, right? Like I love when humans have valuable conversations with other humans. That for me is always the goal. So how do we lift everybody into those conversations, and how do we look at those bottom repetitive tasks and make them more fun? That's where I think AI needs to go for customer success, albeit it's going to take a little while.
Yeah, I haven't seen any tech out there that does that fully, but there is certainly some tech that's out there that is moving the needle on that. And Chaz, I'll send you one after this that you may want to look at. I think that's going to be interesting because number one, security, HIPAA, privacy, GDPR, like these are all going to create havoc on companies who want to use AI to the maximum. Because not a lot of these startups, they're not SOC 2, they're not HIPAA compliant, they're not whatever compliant yet, because they're just getting started. And so it's trying to figure out how do you kind of thread that needle effectively. That's going to be a thing. And then the other is, and I agree with the, how do we tell our vendors what we need? But what I think the problem is the vendors are trying to invent on their own because they have an opinion. And many organizations as the users haven't spent enough time thinking about AI to understand what should they be asking their vendors to go build. And so the ideas that you get are extremely narrow and shallow, and a Atlassian for a Jira or whatever is going to look at that and go, yeah, like 3 people are going to use that thing, so I don't need to build that. And so it has to be figured out how to up level that. But I appreciate everyone's time today. Is there one last thing that you would want to kind of mention as a thought, or an idea, or something someone should take away on the onboarding journey within CS? Things not to do, things to do, whatever. One topic from each of you.
Well, I guess from my side, going back to what I was talking about before, I think cohorting is essential. If you don't cohort really well enough, and look at the milestones of those cohorts, you'll end up banging your head against a brick wall trying to hit targets that might not make sense for those particular customers. So for me, get the cohorting right, and if something's going wrong, revisit that, and that's got to be the constant thing, the constant focus from my point of view.
Love that. I think I'll just go back to what you guys said earlier, and I think communication is key. Figuring out communication, handoff, alignment with other departments that you're talking with is always the key to success.
I love that. So I'll build on communication then and say people. Stop talking about onboarding customers, start talking about onboarding people, and it'll change the conversation and the communication that you're having internally and externally.
Great. So if we put all that together, it's let's make sure that we have the right cohorts of people who we communicate with internally and externally. So there's the summary of all three of yours put together. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to future conversations.
Thanks, everyone.